Good day. My name is Blessing Balaka, and I'm going to be taking you through the cybersecurity awareness chatbot demo. So within this demo, what we're going to see is a chatbot that uses WPF forms, which is basically a graphic user interface, instead of the console application, to essentially respond to cybersecurity questions. So currently we've triggered a run command, and the application
Hello,
is
welcome to the Cybersecurity Awareness Chatbot. I am here to help you stay safe online.
So what you see is essentially a welcome. So the database is connecting. So what we have is basically we've configured a database connection to the WPF form so that we're able to store the username. So now by storing the username, it is able to remember who was the person, the name that was entered into the system, which was then stored in the database. So it says, "Hi, welcome, Blessing." Last time we spoke about the following topics. So these topics, as conversations happen, these conversations are added to the database. So here's VPN, phishing, cybersecurity. What do you want to discuss to enhance your awareness, right? So what you are welcomed with is a menu. So there are menu options that you're welcomed with. So if you click for, it responds by saying that tasks is coming soon, right? Those are for the following POEs. So these are just provisions, but what we have is option one, and option one also has history embedded from the database connection, as we can see here. So nice to see you again, Blessing. Ask me about cybersecurity or tell me about how you feel, or both, you know. So please enter the cybersecurity keyword question that you want to talk about. So to show that we can discuss cybersecurity topics, let's discuss VPNs. So a VPN encrypts your internet connection. So do you want to continue? I say yes, right? Great. Please ask a question. I am confused. I am frustrated, maybe. I am frustrated. I am frustrated at your response. Please let me know more about VPNs. I'm sorry to hear that you are frustrated. I can try to help you step by step. A VPN encrypts your internet connection. So you can see that we've asked the same question. Yes. And then let's say no. Let's say yes. We want to continue. Let me know more about VPNs. A VPN on a public network. You use a VPN on a public Wi-Fi for extra security. So do you want to continue? Please type yes or no. So you see that the responses vary. This is just a anomaly where it says the same response twice, but you can see that on the third attempt, it had showed a new response. Yes, so a new response which to get after that VPN response. So now you can see that it has it can understand the emotion, and it can also reply with the keyword included within the sentence, within the search string. So, and then this is then stored in the database when we click on exit. So the exit event listener is checking to see whether or not, if once you have clicked exit, that's when it will save the conversation history. So when we log back in, you'd be able to see VPN as the topic. But let's change that. Let's change that. But so we can clearly say exit, and then
Goodbye, and thanks for using Cybersecurity Bot.
it then
Come back to
triggers
learn more.
it then triggers a cybersecurity awareness chat, a goodbye from the system, and then when we return, it
Hello,
allows
welcome to
us
the Cybersecurity Awareness Chatbot.
to
I am
resume.
here to help you stay safe online.
So once it connects to the database, we are then able to ask questions. So, hi, Blessing. Last time we spoke about VPN, phishing, cybersecurity. We want to discuss more, and we can continue with the loop, and we can enter. So once the database connects, it recalls the user, and then we can begin. And yeah, so that's essentially how the application functions, and you can basically ask about any cybersecurity related topics. So now I just want to go and show you the dictionary where all of this logic is transpiring, and then we can basically have a code walkthrough of the core functionalities. All right, so what we see when we first enter the application is within here, within this particular YAML file. So the YAML uses a stack panel. I'm sorry, it's buffering. Okay. Yes. So this is basically these are basically the components that we just dragged and dropped, and then the particular order is illustrated here. So this is the title of the chatbot, the height and the dimensions that we're basically setting for the window size. And this is our colors, our color palette. So we can see this is our color palette here for the chatbot, and this is the grid. So within the grid is where essentially all of the elements are within, and then within that we added a stack panel class, and then the stack panel allows us to then print our ASCII. Yeah, so basically printing the ASCII here. There's the name. So within our code, we're referencing this ASCII banner text block using this name using this name that we've assigned. So when we use Figure font in the class, it is getting the reference from here. And then this is basically the border background that you can see in the design from the chatbot. And then these are the grids. So when we're essentially when you're hovering and we're clicking, right, each grid has a specific their columns, and then and then we have like a hover effect over each time there's a user input. Okay, so now there's just two buttons, and then there's yeah, and that's essentially it. So there's two buttons, and there's the text box where we put in the user input. So the user input text box is where we take the user input, and we can see from the name here, then the variable for the percent button, and then the variable for the exit button. So this is where we use this to reference within our code, within the YAML.cs, when we are trying to basically impose logic. So what we have initially here is I want them to be read only because I don't want to manipulate or change the hard-coded responses within the array. So we kept them as read-only fields, as well as the semantic analysis. Everything is and the chat history repository to be also read-only, because we want to accidentally manipulate it within the code base. I know this is a small project, but it's coding standards. But then private public bool, yes. So now, how does the core logic work? So the core logic resides in here. So what we have is basically the chat history repository. So this is the chat history repository, and we basically have this particular class and an enum of SQL Server and SQLite. So in the database, I wanted two options. I wanted to use either SQLite or SQL Server. So because I'm trying to use either SQLite or SQL Server, one is a fail safe, because I don't want in an instance where somebody tries to run the database on their machine and then it fails. So what I did is I have a file-based database, which is the SQLite file here, that we're basically checking. So we basically check for the storage providers, and the active provider is the one that we use, right? Right. So and then we have this asynchronous function. So the reason I'm using asynchronous task is because when I was running it initially, the program was crashing. So because there were too many processes happening, and so this asynchronous allows us to basically wait until certain processes are done, right? So we wait until certain processes are done, so we don't like overload the threads, so that the program doesn't crash. So that's why we used the synchronous task, and then we basically allowed our messages to yeah. So when we save our messages, it's an asynchronous task, and also it also awaits if things are completed. so that there isn't a clash in logic where multiple processes are trying to happen at the same time. Things can still, yes, things can still yeah. So it just allows our code to be more optimized and use memory more efficiently. Um, and then this is essentially the record of the messages. Um, so now if we go to here, this is where we open our database connection and we'll create our SQL tables. And then this is the string, which is basically our fields, right? So the sender is the field here, then there's the message, and there's the time that it was created. So when we open the SQL connection, right, and this is basically if the table doesn't exist, it creates it, but if it exists, it does not, right? So that's why it's a try, and then here is the command that we also await, and then we execute the query, uh, the asynchronous query as well, and then we continue. I'm running out of time. Okay, so using the var command here, we also execute the query, but this is now for the SQLite database. You can see here. Yeah, this is for the SQLite database, and then we then try to save this. Yeah, and then yeah, that's just some error handling. And then here's our fields that we're basically trying to insert into our database. So we have the sender and the message, and then the sender and the message is inserting into the database. Our parameters, so we're adding them with values, the ones that we define here, which are mapped to the sender and the message. And then what we do is then we check for and then this is the try to save the SQLite as well with the same logic. So it's so we have the SQL Server save, and then we have the SQLite save. So it's just basically a duplication of the function where we're basically saying that we're gonna save the SQLite database or the SQL Server database. So it's conditional saving, so that if one fails, there's a backup. I know that there's also a backup database in conventional enterprise, and then to make things easy to configure, this is essentially how we're going to configure the connection string. So there's the connection string for the SQL Server, and there's a connection string for the SQLite. So we basically have these get set parameters, and then here we have the connection string for the SQL Server, and then the connection string for the SQLite, so that we are able to have two databases. One is the file-based one, which is small, which is easy to push to GitHub and others to run with. So it makes it very easy. And then within the models, we basically have the chatbot, which is from the POEPART1. You can see that we still have the data members of keyword and response. We have the constructor of the keyword and the response, then with the display function that returns that response, right? But we're not necessarily we're just using this for mainly the fields, right? The keyword and the response, and then the hard-coded response. If we come to this logic, it's changed slightly. Now we're using a dictionary, and then within that dictionary we are taking into strings, and then a string array, right? So a string and a string array, and the string array is the one which is the second condition within the dictionary. So we are able to then pass in, for example, multiple statements within here. So these are all of the responses which are cycled through the randomization. So when the user is randomizing the for the responses, they basically come here, and then we can see the string this string array this string array parameter here. We basically allows us to basically input all of these responses within the array. So we didn't set a limit, but yeah, that's it. So this is a dictionary, and then yeah, so even with the greetings, um, there are multiple options that come from the chatbot, as well as so for each cybersecurity keyword that is asked, all of them, they come with all of these specific array of options that can be used. And then the randomization is simple. It's just within this randomization class using this object of random. We use the object of random here, right, to get the next response. So yeah, so public static string get random. So here's here we have an array of responses, right? That's auto passing as a parameter. So those responses we check if they're not null, and if they're not null, that's when we invoke the next, which is using the from the random class, right? Yeah, so it's a method which is built in into the random class, which allows us to go to the next response. And then if we go to the chatbot voice, it's just the same old play, but now it's now asynchronous because it will crash because of the threading considerations that we need to look into. But the same greeting of the WAV file is still there, which resides within the bin of the application. And then semantic analysis. So what we have here essentially is um, our delegate. So we have a public delegate bool, right, which returns true or false condition, which you're going to pass in, and then we have a delegate emotional responder, right, for the inputs. So how does it match? So these are the primary labels which we're putting in here. So we have the match is happy, respond happy. Match is frustrated, respond frustrated. Match is sad, respond sad. Match is anxious, respond anxious. So the match is happy is defined here, right? Public, yeah. So and then we basically check whether or not the input of the user's input matches any of these words which indicate happiness, and then and then there's the respond happy. Then there's the respond happy which comes from that, and then matches frustrated uh, contains any phrase. For example, if the user input then matches one of these words, then it will tell us it is true, that it matches frustrated, and then because that is true, that's when the application logic then triggers uh, that this 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 response. So it checks whether or not this is true to return this. If this is true, it returns that. If this is true, it returns that. If this is true, it returns that. Right. So that's essentially the service logic behind the whole application, and how it basically assesses semantic analysis. Sentiment analysis. Sorry, semantics is a different word. Yeah. So what you then get is yeah, this is our database file. Yeah, we don't have an extension to open SQLite. I don't have SQLite Explorer on my device. But then what you then get is, yeah, so basically our old logic still resides as reference, and then the core logic uh, and services, uh, which is the voice, the semantic analysis, and the responses, which is hard-coded responses and randomization. And then within the data, we have the database configurations for the chatbot. And then within the main window, XAML is where we have essentially the UI and the logic which triggers the UI events. But before we proceed, I want us to quickly go to GitHub. Where's my GitHub? Okay, so to GitHub, what we have to check no, this is not the right one. Prog part 2. Okay, so we have to check the commits. So we have about 10 commits, um, and then we have 3 tags, and then yeah, so we essentially have 3 tags, and we have messages for these 3 tags. What else is in the rubric? I think that should cover most of it. Yes, right. Thank you for your time.